I used to be one of the most skeptical people in just about any room. When someone told me about a strange or supernatural experience, something that didn't really fit in what science could explain, I would immediately start thinking about cognitive biases. I thought there had been a natural explanation. Maybe it was a memory distortion, or their brains trying to find patterns, or maybe they were just being suggestible. To me, the experience probably felt real to them, but I believed the cause had to be something we could explain with science, sooner or later. In this video, I want to talk about how that changed for me, how I became more open-minded about the possibility that these experiences might actually be real. That shift had a lot to do with recognizing how limited our communication really is, limited in how people can describe what they went through, and in the tools we use to figure out what is real and what is not real. A few years ago, I started to notice something kind of unsettling. The standard I had for believing something was true was so high that some kinds of truths never even had a chance. When I began having some experience with meditation, I immediately started talking about them with my friends. But as I talked to them, I could see the looks on their faces, curious but also skeptical. And it hit me. If I were in their shoes listening to myself talk, I probably would have reacted the same way, or even worse. And yet, I was having these experiences consistently, systematically. I also remember I had read descriptions of similar experiences before, and honestly, I used to assume they were some kind of mass delusion, or maybe just cognitive biases we hadn't pinned down yet. But now, after going through them myself, those descriptions started to feel surprisingly accurate, maybe a little more poetic than how I would put it, but still close enough. So I started to realize that the issue is that these experiences did not fit neatly into the kind of framework my friends and I were used to. They weren't the kinds of things we could easily measure or replicate, which made them hard to communicate, and even harder to believe. Let me explain what I mean. If you think about it, most of the things we agree on come from third-person kinds of experiences. I can point to something and you can check it for yourself. Sometimes we need tools to do that, like a microscope or a telescope, or enough understanding to follow the logic and evidence. But because we can compare our perspectives, we are able to build shared language about these experiences. That's what gives language economies of scale. When enough people can reliably use the same words to refer to the same kinds of things, it becomes easier to build on each other's knowledge, correct mistakes, and refine meaning over time. We can make our understanding sharper. If I say something you disagree with, we can reason through it together, and there's at least some hope that we will eventually converge on the same understanding. Suppose I give you a backpack and say, this thing is so heavy, and you lift it and say, really, it's not that bad. But then we weigh it and see it's exactly 20 pounds. That gives us a shared reference point. You see this dynamic all over science. Think of Galileo's telescope. Before that, people could only rely on what they saw with the naked eye. But once we had a tool that multiple people could use to observe the same thing, it created a shared platform for reality. Arguments could be settled, refined, or extended because the instrument was public. Others could look for themselves. And that's how we get precision, right? That's how the error correction system of science works, through falsifiability, replicability, and the ability to scale up a shared, precise understanding of things. But now imagine a very different scenario. Imagine a world where only one person had access to the telescope. No one else could look through it. They could describe what they saw, even draw pictures, but the rest of us would have no way to verify it. In that world, we would be entirely dependent on their report. We could listen, we could speculate, but we couldn't confirm. And if two people each had their own private telescopes, but with no way to look through each other's, we wouldn't even know if they were seeing the same thing. That's what first-person experiences are like. The mind becomes the telescope, but only one person can look through it. Now, some first-person experiences are common and consistent enough across people that we have built shared language for them. They do scale up. Think of love, or pain, or the experience of having a thought. We can't measure them directly in a third-person way, but we all recognize them because we have all had these experiences, right? So we are comfortable assuming that others have similar experiences themselves. But there are many first-person experiences that are too niche, too variable from person to person. There are not enough people that have the ability to perceive some things. These are still real experiences, but they are hard to verify, hard to generalize, and hard to scale up. They are hard to talk about in a shared way. Sometimes the challenge is whether the listener has the experiential context to make sense of it. Imagine someone trying to describe a spiritual experience to someone who has never had one. Even if the description is careful and sincere, it might still sound vague or abstract to someone with no comparable frame of reference. Take the phrase, I experienced the absence of self. If you have never encountered anything like a non-dual state, that can sound almost meaningless. But for someone who has, the same words might feel surprisingly precise. Or think of a person in deep grief who says, it's not sadness, it's like the world has shifted. At first, that might seem poetic or overly metaphorical, but then, when grief hits us, we might suddenly realize that is exactly it. You can also see this with people describing psychedelics experiences, for instance. Someone might report a feeling of total unity with reality. Without any first-hand context, that can sound like nonsense or vague mysticism. But for those who have had similar experiences, that same description can feel like a direct and accurate account of the experience. Unfortunately, this communication problem happens even among people who had similar experiences. Imagine that you and I have exactly the same spiritual experience, but we describe it differently. The problem is that we are not sure that the experience was exactly the same, right? After all, the language was different. There was always a chance that the differences in our descriptions reflect a genuinely different experience. And if I try to translate your experience in my language, you may not like it. If you try to translate my experience in your own language, I may not like it either. The moment we try to project one experience onto another, we might flatten the nuance or miss the part that actually mattered the most to us. And what happens if I am imprecise in how I describe my experience? There is very little you can do to tell me that my description is inaccurate. You cannot say, look, you're wrong, here's why, because you haven't had that experience exactly, or at least I'm sure you cannot know that for certain. So I won't trust your judgment, right? If I say, you don't understand, my experience is not at all like the one you describe it, you can't really argue with me. You can't falsify what I'm saying, because you don't have access to the instrument of observation, me. There is no objective way to resolve this disagreement, no shared mechanism for error correction, which makes it very hard to refine the language or test its limits or build anything cumulative around it. This is clearly an epistemic blind spot, something true that does not scale well across minds. And when language cannot scale, we lose the ability to catalog patterns, to stand on the shoulders of giants, to bring nuance and precision into the conversation. The same language might be used to describe different experiences, and different languages might be used to describe the same experience. It becomes the opposite of precision, it becomes confusion. And it is really hard to build science around that. But the thing is, that does not make all these experiences any less real. It is possible that all these first-person experiences are actually true, and that the real problem is our inability to scale the language needed to describe them with enough precision. We may simply lack the conceptual tools to capture what actually happened. I think that is why people often turn to poetic or metaphorical language when trying to describe these kinds of first-person experiences. Poetic language allows for ambiguity, for a kind of flexible meaning that can resonate differently with different people. That ambiguity is actually what helps these descriptions gain reach, so we can scale up the meaning of different first-person experiences. Enough people feel that the description captures the gist of their experience, even if the details vary. If you think about it, this kind of ambiguity is one of the most helpful things about art. It helps certain ideas and experiences reach more people, even when those experiences can't be clearly defined or measured. Think of two people listening to the same piece of music. One might feel joy, the other grief. They are hearing the same notes, but what's happening inside them is completely different. And yet both feel like the music speaks to them. Art is so effective at communicating the kinds of things that are hard to put into exact terms. But the challenge with this kind of ambiguity is that it doesn't sit well with people who are trained to look for precision. When someone who's used to clear definitions and measurable claims hears a poetic description, their first instinct is to probe it, to analyze it, to try to pin it down. They want to understand it in the only way they know how, through clarity, replication, and structure. And when that doesn't work, they fall back on skepticism. Not because they are trying to dismiss the experience, but because the tools they are used to simply don't apply. And when those tools stop working, skepticism is the only tool they have left. The alternative to skepticism is too chaotic for them. At the same time, the opposite problem also exists. Some people accept these experiences too quickly, taking them at face value as if they perfectly capture what happened. In my experience, some of these people are just gullible. They have a soft notion of what is true and what is not true. They pay little attention to how memory, interpretation, or language might be shaping the description of the experience. And some of these people are not gullible at all. They just had similar experiences in the past, and because of that, they feel more okay taking these descriptions of these experiences at face value. It is a bit like how we treat more common first-person experiences like love, pain, or thought. If you felt something similar, it's easier to accept someone else felt something similar too. But I think there's also a broader reason why so many people accept these reports as they are. There's something in the zeitgeist right now that encourages us to treat personal experience as beyond critique. To question someone's account, even gently, can feel like a violation. In my opinion, not engaging with these experiences critically is not helpful either. If we never probe, never clarify, never ask better questions, we lose the chance to refine how we talk about these experiences. We don't test the metaphors, we don't challenge the interpretations, and when we don't do that, we don't evolve the language. We don't build bridges between people's inner experiences. We don't lay the groundwork for cumulative understanding. So uncritical acceptance can be just as limiting as outright dismissal. It stops us from developing the kind of precision that would allow these experiences to scale, to be studied, compared, or built upon. And it closes off the possibility of building science around them. So after hearing all this, you might start to accept that there are many experiences out there that could be real, even if they are hard to describe, hard to measure, or perhaps easy to dismiss too quickly. But then you might hit a wall. Supernatural experiences? Really? I think the issue here is once again about language. What do we even mean by supernatural? For instance, imagine a world where no one has any senses. No sight, no hearing, no touch. People navigate through indirect signals, patterns, internal changes, maybe shifts in pressure or temperature. Over time, they've built a kind of science around those signals. It works, it helps them survive. They believe they have a solid grasp of what is real. Now imagine that you arrive in that world with the ability to see, hear, and feel. You try to describe color, or music, or the sensation of holding something in your hand, but they have no frame of reference, no way to picture what you're talking about. You say, I saw something bright, and they ask, what does bright mean? You say, I heard something soft, and they say, what does soft even mean? To them, what you are describing falls outside their system, outside their paradigm. These words are meaningless. They might call it supernatural because it doesn't fit what they call natural. So maybe the boundary between natural and supernatural is about what fits inside the models most of us have already built about how nature works. In that sense, this expression, supernatural, functions as a placeholder for the not yet formalized, not yet measurable, or not yet verifiable. We already accept that we don't perceive everything that is real. Evolution never required us to notice certain aspects of reality. That's why it took us so long to figure out that there are magnetic fields, ultraviolet light, or subatomic particles. We believe in those things now because we built tools to detect them, instruments that extend our first-person senses. But what if the radius of perception is a bit wider for some people than for others? Then some people might perceive real things that others cannot. And until we build a science around that, our sense of what is real will depend on how many people can perceive it. If there is no critical mass, we'll be more likely to call it supernatural. And if you think about it, that is a flawed property of an epistemic system, to count something as real just because enough people agree, and to dismiss something simply because not enough people understand it. That is why it makes more sense to me to approach these questions with humility, to be more open-minded about whether these kinds of experiences might be real. Of course, that doesn't mean we should take the experience at face value. Quite the opposite. The less common the experience, the harder it is to falsify. or even to falsify an imprecise description of it. So yes, there is more room for error, because our error correction system for these kinds of experiences is probably very slow at best. And in the extreme case where only a handful of people have this experience, the more vulnerable we are to the existence of charlatans that make something up for personal gains. So where do we go from here? One possible response to this is to have more epistemic humility, to recognize that some truths might not scale easily because our tools for verification and communication are limited. Humility means being able to say, I don't fully understand this yet. Maybe because I haven't had the right experience, or I'm missing key concepts, or perhaps I'm asking the wrong questions. It takes humility to not have an opinion about something, to withhold judgment. But staying open-minded does not mean being gullible. That will be the absence of discernment. I think we need to strike the balance of remaining curious while still thinking critically. I plan to talk a lot more about this in the future videos. I also think there's another response to all this, to recognize that we can train ourselves to perceive more. Just like learning a new language or developing an ear for music, we can develop cognitive and emotional tools that make us more sensitive to certain kinds of experiences. Practices like meditation, journaling, or even deep listening can expand the range of what we are able to notice and articulate. We're not stuck with the basic settings of our perception that evolution gave us. The more subtle and unfamiliar experience you have, the more you will see the language problem I've been talking about in this video, and the better equipped you become to engage with similar experiences that others may report to you. If this resonates with you, you might want to check out my wife's videos on this channel. The one here on this screen could be a great place to start. And finally, we also need to explore how to scale up plurality, how to make space for different kinds of truths and different ways of knowing, without forcing them all into a single rigid framework. That is a deeper challenge. It's about rethinking how we share meaning across people, across perspectives, and across types of experiences. I hope to explore more about that in the future videos. Let me know in the comments if there's a specific topic you want me to discuss.